Sam Herder, Senior FCS Analyst, Hero Sports, and also on Twitter at Sam Herder FCS. We've had Sam on before about the FCS Championship tonight. Montana State, a 4-decade drought. And yes, of course, the 800-pound gorilla in North Dakota State. Sam, thank you very much for your time. Obviously, North Dakota State's been around this thing a long time, over the last decade plus. Give me the story about Montana State and their quarterback, Malott, and what kind of run they've made this year.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And Montana State has really been the most dominant and well-rounded FCS team this year. They had a close game with FCS New Mexico, but won that one to start the year in week 0. And ever since then, they've really won most of their games pretty comfortably. Their closest game was against a really good UC Davis team where they won by 2 points, but the Bobcats did have a huge lead in that one before UC Davis kind of climbed back and scored a few touchdowns in the fourth quarter there. So it has been a dominant season for Montana State. I know it's kind of a cliche to say we're going to go 1-0 every week. Like, it seems like every team says that, but Montana State has really taken that approach of just going 1-0 every week, because I think the Bobcats were really good last year, but I think they got ahead of themselves a little bit as far as thinking they were national title contenders. And last year really ended in disappointment for Montana State against NDSU. So I think this year the team just looks very laser focused to take it 1 week at a time.
So how good is Malott, the quarterback who won the Walter Payton Award? So obviously the best player in FCS.
Yeah, he's dynamic. He doesn't have the prototypical quarterback size. I think he's probably 6 feet, 215 pounds, somewhere around there. But he's well put together. Super fast guy, probably the fastest guy on the field. So he has great running ability. But his evolution has really been as a passer. Again, he's not the prototypical passer. Throwing motion and 7-step drop sitting in the pocket. That's not necessarily a strength, but in previous years, it was a lot of easy routes, a lot of fade routes and all of that. But this year he's really evolved as a quarterback, and he can make all the throws. And so he's a true dual threat and super fun to watch. He's from Butte, Montana, which is, one of the most legendary towns in the state. And so he's already a legend in the state of Montana, but I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that if Montana State wins tonight, Malott will go down as one of the most important figures in Montana sports history, the state overall.
I went to Stephen F. Austin, and of course a lot of things have changed with what was in the 80s, like when Montana State won it in 84. They were really, really good, and at times played teams like that on the road, Montana State, whoever it might have been. But I do remember when they had success, and they've just kept knocking on the door. How much of a frustration it has been, because the Dakota schools have dominated. We know that. How much of a frustration has it been for them to be so close, and yet it's been so long?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because, NDSU and South Dakota States are relatively new to Division I. In the grand scheme of things, they didn't join Division I until about 2004, 2005, somewhere around there for North Dakota State and South Dakota State. Now, that's obviously 20 years ago, but in the grand scheme of program history, it's not like they've been FCS for decades and decades and decades. And it was, especially Montana, but even a little bit Montana State, they were some of the powers in the FCS. And so for NDSU, especially, it's been South Dakota State the last couple of years, but really it only took NDSU about 3 years of being playoff eligible to win their first national title in 2011. And so they broke onto the scene, and they took over, Montana's mantle as the power, and they took over Georgia Southern's mantle, as a power in the FCS, and they did it relatively quickly. And so for the last decade or so, people were chasing North Dakota State, and then South Dakota State was able to do that and overtake NDSU. And so now, people have been chasing South Dakota State and North Dakota State. And, when it comes to programs that can do so, you have to invest. You have to invest in nutrition and strength and conditioning and new facilities. And frankly, there's just not a lot of FCS programs out there anymore that have the internal and external support to fund things at an FBS level. But Montana State is one of those things where, yes, they're an FCS team, but how they operate, how they run things, it is definitely FBS level of how Montana State is funding its football program. Same thing with North Dakota State and South Dakota State.
Craig Bull, Chris Kleiman, we know where he is. Craig now is running the American Football Coaches Association, actually located here. And of course, Matt Entz, the success he had, they win no matter what. And it's a program. We see that happen right now when it comes to FBS, the Power Fours or whatever. Teams have their consistency. How would you describe North Dakota State's dominance for the last, 11 appearances in 13 years? And they've won so many of those championships.
Yeah, it truly is a program. And I think with North Dakota State, their national success goes all the way back to Division II. And even before Division II, they were, I can't remember what it specifically, it was called, National College or Conference. I don't remember, this was like in the 60s or whatever the case may be. But NDSU has, I believe, 17 total national championships. And so they have 9 in the FCS, and, obviously plenty more in D2 and before them. And so when they broke onto the scene in the FCS and transitioned to Division I, they already had kind of this championship standard. And I think you see that as a program where it, they've gone through multiple head coaches and, they've gone through multiple NFL quarterbacks, and yet they keep on reloading. And I just think the foundation is there for just continued success because, a lot of FCS teams obviously want to be good in football, but a program like NDSU demands to be good in football. Like that, there's no other option. And so whether it's internally, the resources they put into football, or just the passionate fan base that supports NDSU. It's hard to see NDSU getting off this track, no matter what changes go into place internally at NDSU. I mean, they just have such a strong support, and NDSU just a few years ago put up a $55 million practice facility that rivals probably any practice facility in all of college football. And they didn't use school money, they didn't use state money. All $55 million was privately raised by NDSU fans and boosters. There's not a lot of college football programs that can do that, and so that's why I think NDSU, no matter who their head coach is, no matter who their starting quarterback is, it's just it's as much of a program as a football program can be with how they reload every year.
Sam Herder, FCS Hero Sports, with us, and at Sam Herder, HERDER, FCS on Twitter. You mentioned their run of North Dakota State, and I saw a note from you on your Twitter timeline that the 2010 win against Montana State's really something that launched them in the foundation of their dynasty run. What was that? Why was that game, that specific year, such a big deal?
Well, you go back to 2010, and NDSU was not what they are now. Obviously they made NDSU snuck into the playoffs in 2010 at 7-4. They won their first ever playoff game in the first round against Robert Morris in 2010. And so they were an unseeded team, and they went out to Montana State, who was kind of, even back then, was still a brand name in the FCS, and Montana State, I think, was like a seeded team, and NDSU trailed going into the fourth quarter. And then the Bison rattled off 28 straight points and really hammered Montana State for that playoff win. And then the next week, NDSU went out to Eastern Washington and was in a back-and-forth battle, lost in a controversial fashion with a fumble called on the goal line, lost by 7 points. I think it was in overtime. And then Eastern Washington later that year went on, a couple of rounds later, went on to win the national championship. And keep in mind, this was NDSU's first ever playoff appearance, so it was all new to them. And how they beat Montana State and how they nearly beat the eventual national champs, Eastern Washington, I think that made NDSU realize, we're actually pretty close to being one of the best teams in the FCS. And then the next year, the Bison win their first national title in 2011, and they win 5 straight from 2011 to 2015. And so I think a lot of people point to that Eastern Washington really close loss as kind of like the launching point of NDSU realizing how good they can be. But I think it actually happened a week before at Montana State, a blue blood, where they beat up on them in the fourth quarter, and that made them realize that, okay, like our program has a chance to do something pretty special here.
All right, we mentioned Tommy Mellott, the Walter Payton Award winner. Cam Miller, obviously one heck of a player for North Dakota State. How much, not impact. We know he has to have an impact, but your thoughts about the career he's had?
Yeah, it's been a special career for Cam Miller, and I mean he had the tough duty of taking over for Brock Jensen, and then after Brock Jensen it was Carson Wentz, NFL draft pick, and then I went to Easton Stick, an NFL draft pick, and then I went to Trey Lance, an NFL draft pick, and so the standard of quarterback play at NDSU is as high as it can be. And Cam Miller is now in his fourth year starting, I guess fifth year technically if you want to go back to the 2021 spring season where he started some games, but 2021 fall, he was okay. 2022, he played okay again. Like he was a pretty good quarterback, but not, an All-American, not a Trey Lance. Last year, I thought he took a major step forward and had an All-American season. Yet Miller still faced a lot of doubts coming into this year, not only from national media, but also from NDSU fans, because Miller in previous games, he had struggled in some big playoff games. He came into this year never beating South Dakota State. I think Miller was 0-4 in his career against South Dakota State. So he faced doubts coming into this year. And this season, any doubters he has, I think he's quickly erased because he's put together a fantastic season. He beat South Dakota State twice. He's come up clutch in playoff performances. And so it's really been kind of a full circle moment for Miller because he did lead NDSU to the national title here in Frisco over Montana State 3 years ago. He was the starting quarterback, but NDSU really won that game with their ground game and defensively. And so if the Bison are able to get a win tonight, to me, I think it's all going to come down to Cam Miller's arm because NDSU's rushing attack hasn't quite gotten going in the playoffs. And so I think they're going to put a lot on Miller's arm to go out there and win this game.
Man, I'm intrigued by this matchup because of the history of these two. Obviously, not only from that game many years ago, but also what Montana State's been trying to do and what North Dakota State has done amazingly. 11th championship appearance in 14 years, and we know that they have won a ton and also along the way beaten Montana State, including that one that launched them into this what has been a tremendous run and obviously a dynasty. Sam, thank you very much. I love the fact national TV, solo night tonight. They get all the attention. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it and have a great day.
All right, thank you. I appreciate you for having me on.
Sam Herder, Hero Sports on the FCS Championship game, Montana State, North Dakota State in Frisco. And this is 365 Sports.